I'm Timothy Luce, and I'm building a castle. So, how am I going to do it? Well, I'm still resolving that, but the main assumption I've made so far based on the research is I'm going to do it using tilt-up. What's tilt-up? Alright, basically you form on a flat surface, usually poured concrete, something that looks sort of like a sandbox for a child. In that, you put your reinforcing steel. Sometimes a form liner goes in first to give the concrete some texture, but you put your reinforcing steel, your concrete, and your lifting plates. Then, after the concrete is cured, you stand that wall up and you have a flat wall that you cast in place. What I'm going to try to do different, and I had this idea a few years ago, and at the time I wasn't even sure if anybody was doing even tilt-up. I didn't even know what it was called. But I found a place called HollowTop. It's at hollowtop.com, and I found that like the next day after I had the idea. And this guy has actually done what I'm going to try to do. And just last night, and I hadn't found anybody else trying to do it with stone embedded, and I'm going to explain that in a second. But my wife just last night found a guy, Errol Russell, I believe was his name. He and his wife have, he works with a contracting company called E.V. Cox, and they build a house similar to how we're going to do it, even similar materials. I had already decided on stone called riprap, although we're going to do it different. We're going to do it using the rubble method with actual masonry principles. Theirs was more like the chaos method, and it's beautiful. But anyhow, I did find somebody, so I'm going to explain to you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So first, we need some sand. Then we need some rocks. Now, this is just, it's limestone. It comes from the quarry. It's about $12-ish a ton. Whereas the stone I've been buying, the square stone, it's a split veneer, it's close to $600–700 a ton. So I'm getting at least a 20% yield, sometimes a 30 and 40% yield in all the stone that I get this way. It comes from the quarry. The disadvantage is if you're in a rush, you have to sort it and pick the stone that's usable in a wall. So now I'm going to show you how we put the tilt-up monolithic stone veneer in place. Alright, what I'm going to use to actually show you how this works is actually a test panel that I built. I just built these 8-inch forms. I put a sand bed, inch and a half, something like that. And then I put the rocks, and then I put in the reinforcing steel. And this is just a little test wall, so I just guessed. I didn't have an engineer spec this. And then you pour the concrete. And I'm probably going to let this cure 28 days. I could probably get away with a couple weeks, as small as this is. But I'm going to show you how it actually comes together. Alright, I just wanted to give you guys a quick demo on how I'm actually going to do this. Now, all this is subject to engineer approval. I haven't got that yet, and that's actually what I'm on the hunt for right now. I'm looking for a structural engineer crazy enough to take on building a castle. But I wanted to show you guys how this works. Let's go ahead and pretend I have a plastic, some plastic sheeting down here, just plastic 4 mil probably, and that's gonna, I'll explain what that does in a minute. But then we would cast some sand down to create a sand bed for our rocks to lay on, and then you just kind of smooth that over till it's around an inch and a half. Inch and a half is what I'm shooting for, and then you take your rocks and you snuggle them into that sand, okay? And I'm going to explain why here in a second. Then you take another rock, and you have to pay attention to the face, because that's the part you can't see. Once it goes down, it's down. You snuggle that one in too, okay? Now, this sand, then I would come back and pack it and use a brush to give it an even finish. But this sand serves the purpose of holding the mortar back from the concrete back from the face of the rock. So the concrete will seep down in here, and the next thing that we would put on here before we poured concrete would be our reinforcing steel. So we've got plastic, sand, stone, reinforcing steel, pour your concrete, 28 days later you stand your wall up, and you have a stone wall that you, a non-skilled mason, laid in much less time than it would take in a mason. Granted, they would probably argue it doesn't look quite as nice. But if you are a creative person, you can visualize things, you can make this happen. What this is sitting on right now is my test version of the exact same thing I just described, which I'm about a week away from turning this puppy over. And then I'll see if it works. The purpose of the plastic is to create a sort of a... What I did to hopefully prevent the concrete water from leaching onto the surface of the rock was I put a sheet of plastic down first before I put the sand down. Then I saturated the sand so it's already wet. And then hopefully when the concrete gets in there, it'll basically just become a pond. And then the concrete water won't leach too much to the surface of the rock.